Hey there, everybody. It's me, John Johnsick, back again with another video. And today is the most important day in human history. Today, I've got two of the coolest guys in video games, TV, comics, the internet, with me here today to talk about the Daredevil Netflix TV series. To my right, well, I'll say the right. It's the internet, so it doesn't really matter. The philosophy man, the most knowledgeable Batman person I think I've ever met before, Mr. Beware the Backseat, Steve Backseat.
Hey everybody, how are you doing?
I think everyone's doing pretty good. I can't speak for the entire world, but I think North America's pretty good right now.
I don't know why I asked that. I don't think people can answer.
Well, they could technically post in the comments, but I feel
could.
like people don't like doing that anymore.
No. I feel like it's a Google thing potentially.
Yeah, probably. And to our left, the most handsome man I know, and I think the only Buddhist I know too. He is the superhero enthusiast, Alex.
Hey, yeah, I'm totally regretting choosing a name that was such a tongue twister.
I'm just excited, I think.
It's also terrible to reply to you on Twitter because half my characters are just gone right there.
Yeah.
So I'm gonna start right off the bat. I've seen a lot of chatter about the Netflix model when it comes to this TV series. For those people that don't know, the Netflix model, if you don't have Netflix, then A, why are you watching this? You should go get Netflix, watch Daredevil, come back and watch this because it's going to be full of spoilers. But the Netflix model, basically, when they have a TV series like House of Cards, Inspector Gadget, Richie Rich, they have a whole bunch of Netflix-produced TV series. They release the entire season on one day. Do you guys think that this model, the kind of binge watching everything at once, adds or detracts anything from the Daredevil series?
Well, I mentioned in my general review that this thing is designed as a 13-hour movie, and I think that's the worst way to watch it. Because that's exactly what I did. I woke up at 3 a.m. and watched it for 13 hours straight, and it's not a good idea because it's not that it doesn't work as a 13-hour movie. It's that every episode's got so much going on in it that binge watching does you a disservice because you're just overloaded with symbols and ideas and foreshadowing bits that it's impossible to realize the deeper stuff that's going on, and you only kind of get the broad strokes of it. Although that's rare because it's Daredevil. It happens a little bit with House of Cards, but when we talk about things like Richie Rich or Inspector Gadget,
Yeah.
I don't think there's a complexity problem there.
I don't know. That first episode of Richie Rich was. Alex, how did you? I know Steve did the 13-hour movie. Did you binge it, or did you give yourself time in between each episode?
I binge watched it. I took a break for lunch and whatnot, but yeah, I pretty much watched it all in one big block. I sort of agree with Steve that that's maybe not the best way to do it, just because I felt like every episode of the show feels relatively distinct from every other episode, and so it's almost like it's written as if it was a TV show being broadcast week to week, only it all came out on Netflix in one day. So, I mean, I think you can certainly binge watch it and enjoy it that way. It's just a case of if you wanted to watch it week to week or spread it out, I don't feel like you would be missing anything.
Yeah, I watched the first episode on, let's see, it came out Thursday, I think?
Friday.
Friday. So I tried staying up, but for me it was like 2 or 3 in the morning, and I was like, I'm just going to sleep now. So the next day I watched the first episode, started the second one, and then I had to go out and do things. And then I watched like episodes 3 through 10 until like 4 o'clock in the morning. I think I was just continuously watching them. So I had little breaks for like the last few episodes and the beginning episodes, but I mostly the middle chunk binged it all. And I've heard some people say that story-wise and for the episodes, binging, it doesn't add or detract anything from it, and but the thing that it might hurt is the marketing, because right now Daredevil's all anyone's talking about. But if everyone's binging it in 2 days and trying to watch it, next week, well, I don't know if everyone's going to be talking about Daredevil.
Yeah, that's an interesting point about how the Netflix model kind of works in that respect. If they can't, it's almost like a movie release. Everything gets built up to a certain point, and then we get to release date, and then after that, presumably people are going to still watch it and can watch it whenever they want, but it's not a big deal anymore. It's just kind of that day comes and then passes.
Yeah, and I think Netflix tries to beat that a little bit by making every episode close to an hour long. So even if you want to binge watch the whole thing, it is kind of exhausting to sit there for 2 to 3 hours at a time just to get through 3 episodes.
Yeah.
But even so, yeah, after about a weekend, a lot of people just kind of die the hype down a little bit. But the cool thing about this show is since it's comic book, it's littered with references all over the place every episode. So even if the mass audiences aren't talking about it, there's still comic book things to look at for weeks on end before you find everything.
I think an interesting thing about this series also is that it's not one of those shows where you watch an episode and you feel like you have to get the next one. It actually almost feels better to like watch, especially episode 8, I think it is, the Kingpin's origin. I had to take like a little break after that just to kind of wrap my head around all of the stuff they did. But it's interesting. You brought up the comics, which is another thing I wanted to talk about. Is that everyone across the board, either they're a comics fan or not, kind of universally loves this show. I haven't heard any harsh critics about it saying that it's very bad. I've heard some nitpicky things here and there, but nobody thinks the show is bad. And it's interesting because this is probably the best adaptation of a source material I've ever seen, and yet it takes a lot of departures from the comics. Do you guys think that the departures from the comics hurt that transition from someone watching the show and going, oh wow, I really like this Daredevil stuff, I might want to try and read the comics?
I'll let Steve handle that first since he's a big Daredevil expert.
Not really an expert, but I've read a lot of the comics, but I don't think it does at all, really. And since this is spoilers, I'll mention this. The death of Ben Urich is a thing that I've got just a couple of reservations about, not because it wasn't handled well, but because I can't imagine an ongoing Daredevil or even Spider-Man universe without Ben Urich.
Yeah.
That's kind of tricky to juggle, but at the same time, they do so much of the comic book stuff well that even if you watch the show and then go into, say, Man Without Fear and read that and it's vastly different, it's still the exact same characterizations, it's still the exact same voices in your head, it's still the exact same style of storytelling, even if the plots don't line up exactly. So I mentioned in my review it's the best adaptation ever, not because it's my favorite adaptation ever, it might be, but just on objective merits. If you're a guy that just watches this TV show or you're a person that you just read a comic book, you have the exact same stuff to talk about thematically and character-wise because they do all of that perfectly. So I don't think there's really even a disconnect noticeably at all between non-comic book fans and comic book fans with this character and with this show. I think they handle all of that as best as you possibly could.
I tend to think adaptations often, or at least have the possibility to work better, just because you can distill everything from a lot of source material down into sort of the essential stuff and have it be really lean, and sort of explore where you want to. I felt like the Daredevil show did that really well. I mean, they took stuff from all over Daredevil's history and kind of put it all together in an early year story, and I thought it worked quite well.
Yeah, and I think all three of us are kind of, at least in the hardcore comics community, outliers, because all three of us, at least, are usually proponents of kind of change. For an adaptation for me, I think Daredevil is perfect because it gets the core of the character, it gets the world, it gets the universe, and it makes you understand how it works and all the nuts and bolts of it without it having to be every single thing line up perfectly. And because I read the books, I'm sorry, but I loved how they handled Ben Urich. I loved Karen Page. Karen Page in the comics wasn't really anything. She was just kind of the hot blonde paralegal. And I love how they were able to take that and still get the nuts and bolts and still make you understand what is Daredevil with being able to take some licenses and take some chances on things.
Well, I'll disagree a little bit and say that Karen Page definitely has a lot more depth in the comics, especially with like the Kevin Smith stuff and the Frank Miller stuff.
Well, the ones I've read, I'll say.
Okay, yeah, no, that's fair. But I mean, especially Daredevil Born Again, she is an incredible character in that. They get a lot of that right. The one thing I think they really diverge on, because I haven't seen this in any comics, but she's got more in common and more of a romantic thing going with Foggy than anybody else.
Yeah.
And that's kind of bizarre, just because in the comics you see Matt and Karen together, and it's almost like a Superman, Lois Lane, Peter Parker, Mary Jane kind of thing. So to see her and like her with Foggy more than I like her with Matt is kind of surprising.
It's interesting because I definitely felt that that relationship worked.
Yeah.
I guess in the comics, the way I always saw the Karen thing for Matt was she was, I guess to draw a parallel with like the Nolan Batman movies, sort of the equivalent of Rachel in that she was the hero's promise of a normal life, and that's one of the things that gets brought up a lot in this series is how much Matt's love life really sucks. He totally goes after the wrong type of woman every time. I don't know if they're going to build towards that kind of relationship with Karen or not as time goes on, but it was certainly nice to see them do something different there.
Yeah.
Yeah, and well, there's so many things that this show does right and that I want to touch on because there's just a lot of good stuff in here. I don't think there was really an episode that I went away from not even 100% enjoying. There might have been like one part where I was like, well, that was... I don't know if I can even say that with 100%. That there's any part where I just didn't... Something, brought a bad taste to my mouth. But, Steve, you brought up kind of the death of Ben Urich. And I think that is an incredibly important thing, especially for comics, but just for the TV series, because he's kind of the first real supporting character that dies. I mean, we have Claire, no, not Claire, the Tenant, Mrs. Cardenas?
Elena? Yeah, Elena Cardenas.
Yeah, Elena, yeah. She dies, but none of the actual, Foggy, Karen, like, I expected Ben to be a staple in the series. I expected him to kind of find that reporter in him again. So how did the death of Ben Urich kind of, let's talk about that a little bit, how did that kind of impact you?
I was sad. I was really disappointed because, like you guys, I really like Ben Urich, and he is such a staple of kind of that corner of the Marvel Universe. And he's just a great character, and the actor that they chose is just utterly perfect for the role.
Yeah.
And to just throw him away like that, it just seems like such a waste.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of potential with that character. There's so much great stuff in the comics, like when Urich finds out Matt is Daredevil, and when Elektra shows up, and kind of his desire to kind of keep reporting, but fearing for his life at the same time. He's got so much great stuff in the comics that it's sad to see him go this early, and especially because of the actor. We see a lot of news articles these days about how changing a character's gender or race has become like a popular trend, and it's more just about enforcing diversity than anything else. But I mean, if people were ever worried about change from the comics as far as race and gender go, look at this guy play Ben Urich. He's phenomenal. He's perfect. Race has got nothing to do with it, and this is how you handle that kind of stuff. But yeah, when he dies, when Kingpin kills him, I nearly had a heart attack in the chair. He's such a good character. It was such a huge thing to do, especially considering where you introduce him with that other mob informant that says that when I saw articles about my crime jobs from other people, they would mention my family, and you're the only guy that didn't. And so Kingpin kills him over mentioning his mother. That's great.
It's one of those things where after it first happened, and even the next couple episodes, because it impacts the show. The next episode starts with his funeral. It stuck with me, but after thinking about it, like today, it's so sad because I want to see more from the actor, because I love the actor and I love the character. But even that, I didn't even, Steve, what you just said, I didn't even make that connection. I forgot about that. And it's one of those things where I feel like he had such a complete character arc that I'm sad that he left, and I'm sad that we don't get to see more of him, but it was just done so well that I can't fault the show for doing it, because, I mean, his story was kind of a complete cohesive whole of this man who wants to do more, wants to do the right thing, but always was kind of scared, and then finally getting over that fear and doing it, and then in the end, what he was afraid of actually happened to him.
Yeah, cashing in on that theme of the man without fear. They do that really well. It's not heavy-handed at all. I mean, there are certain dialogue exchanges that are a little bit on the nose, but it still really works because everyone's getting over their fear. Kingpin's getting over his fear of being like his father. Same with Vanessa. Same with Karen and Foggy and Matt, and all of them are dealing with that question on multiple levels. So when Ben overcomes the fear for his life and then ultimately dies anyway, it's hard to not just take a break from that episode and wonder what went through the guy's mind as Kingpin was choking him out.
It was really I had that like TV viewer mindset. I was just like, okay, when's Matt coming in? When's somebody?
Yeah.
I kept expecting that too, like Kingpin to get bashed in the back of the head with a screamo stick or something. But it just never happened, and then it's no, we lost him. But yeah, I agree that he does get a complete arc here, so it is kind of hard to complain on that level. It's just, I guess, as comic fans, we sort of see it from a different perspective.
Yeah. And I think a great thing that this show does is, I tweeted about it while I was watching, is that all of the beats feel deserved. A lot of times when you're watching a movie, you know, someone dies and you're supposed to feel sad, or, you know, the main hero is supposed to get angry about it, but you don't feel that connection between the people. When Mrs. Cardenas died, we saw her for a good 4 to 5 episodes, and I felt really sad just seeing them break down when she died, and just almost everything this show accomplishes. And the last episode, I'm mixed about, because the rest of the show is very, very, you know, kind of dark and violent, and the last episode almost felt like the third act of a superhero movie.
I would agree with that.
Yeah.
I would say the last episode, unfortunately, was kind of the weakest one in my opinion.
Agreed. It's kind of sad to see because it's the only one that's written and directed by Stephen Knight. So I don't know if it was his fault or if there was just too much to juggle at that episode, but everything with Kingpin just felt really rushed there at the end, and it kind of just evolved into one big fight there, and I didn't really care for that.
It wasn't even really a great fight either compared to some of the earlier ones we had seen in the series.
Yeah, I know. Like episode 2, that hallway fight, that's all anyone talks about after they get there.
People are still talking about how it's the greatest, you know, fight scene they've ever seen, and it's very, first of all, it's a single shot, which in of itself is kind of a crazy thing to do. But it's very reminiscent of a foreign film called Old Boy.
Yeah.
And it's because, except the camera style is a little different, but the general kind of idea about that is the same. I love everything about all the fight scenes. But what I especially love, and especially in that scene, is that the cronies, they take a lot to get down. Matt has to hit.
They keep getting back up.
And Matt's like tired, and he's like barely swinging. Everything that this show does with the fight scenes serves a purpose. You know, these guys are hardened criminals. They're not going to just go down with one punch. Matt is still, he has a lot of training, but he's still a man. And he's always hurt. That's another thing I love in the show. There's not really a moment where has some ache or some pain from the previous night or the previous fight.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's great. One of the things about that fight is superheroes always have this kind of random roundhouse or jump kind of stylized kick that seems really impractical, and Matt's got a lot of that in this show. But in that second episode, he does one, and it's really pathetic looking. It's really tired. It's really slogged, and I love that. He's twirling in the air, and he barely got off the ground. His feet are barely apart, and it's just the most pathetic stylized kick you could imagine, and it totally works in the context of the show.
I liked how his fighting style was very acrobatic like that.
Yeah.
I thought that was a good translation.
Yeah, the fact that his senses would make his fighting style different really worked, and you get a lot of that within the Stick episode. I think the Stick episode might ultimately be my favorite. That one was just fantastic.
See, I was thinking. I love the Stick episode for many reasons. First of all, the person that got to play Stick
Oh,
was amazing. I have no idea who that. And that was another thing I love about this show is that like I barely knew any of the actors. I knew Karen from she was on True Blood, and I mean Vincent D'Onofrio, but I've never really seen Charlie Cox. I've never really seen the guy who plays Foggy Nelson. And a lot of these actors, the brothers, Vladimir and I forget
Anatoly?
Anatoly. Okay, I thought that was it. But
Yeah.
just everybody did such a good job. Rosario Dawson as Claire, she was amazing. I loved her. Um, but it was interesting. You talked about favorite episodes, and I kind of wanted to touch on that a little bit because this show is so serialized, and yet everything kind of feels like its own thing until you get later on. Like those first couple episodes, if you watch them in a row, you can tell how they bridge. You know, it's like at the end of the first episode, he sees the boy get taken off. At the beginning of the second episode, he is beaten up after confronting them. You know, they don't show us that part, but I really love the Stick episode because of a lot of the things it mentioned and referenced and what it means for the show going forward. But that Kingpin episode, though, oh my gosh.
That was like the best of The Sopranos all rolled into one
Oh,
single
yeah.
episode.
It was so
It's
good.
incredible.
I mean, and even the guy that got to play the young Kingpin was fantastic. The child actors in the show are great.
Yeah, and that's an interesting thing about the Stick episode is that we got to see a lot of young Matt Murdock and fighting, and I wasn't annoyed.
I think it's hilarious that Stick runs away for 20 years after getting a friendship bracelet.
That was so perfect.
That's totally Stick. That's completely comic book. I love that.
But so Steve, you know a little bit more about Daredevil than I do. Is the Black Sky a reference?
No. The Black Sky's not really a reference to anything, really. They are doing the hand and the whole Chast thing from the comics, where Stick's part of this war against the hand for his own little cult of ninjas. And the guy that he sees at the end that's sort of giving him the orders looks like one of the ninjas that Stick trains in the comics, although it looks like a little bit of a role reversal there. But as far as something called Black Sky, it's never really mentioned as far as I've read.
Interesting. So we talked about Kingpin, and I gotta talk more about him because first of all, D'Onofrio's performance from the first time we see him, which is kind of my favorite thing, is that we see him as this awkward, bumbling, not even bumbling, but just kind of awkward. He's trying to ask out an art director. And his awkwardness just makes the brutality so brutal because this entire time, the first time we've seen him, we see him as this guy who doesn't know how to talk to a woman. You know, and even his mannerisms and his pacing of words, he almost sounds like a child. And that's a very important thing for Kingpin's character in this show, is that he's kind of this child inside of a monster. You know, there's this idea that he was looking in the mirror and he saw, you know, him as a child covered in blood. And that visual was just, it stuck with me.
Yeah. The whole opening scene for that episode when he's just getting ready for the day, like the way he makes his breakfast and the way he picks out his suits and everything. That's all wonderfully symbolic, all wonderfully layered, really fun to watch too, just considering that we see this guy first stumble on dates, and then because his date gets ruined, he decapitates a man with a car door.
With the car, it was so brutal. It was, just watching that. Like, first of all, when he pulled him out, it was like, oh, because Wesley's just like, yes, passenger door, and I'm like, oh god. And he just starts wailing on him. I love how he hits because he looks like a child when he's fighting because he's going like this.
Yeah.
He's throwing a tantrum.
Yeah.
And, just everything that Vincent D'Onofrio does as an actor builds to that idea of him kind of still being a child.
He needs to win all of the awards for that performance. I almost don't even really know what to say, other than, just I need to watch it again.
This is the thing I love about this show is that it benefits from multiple watchings. It's definitely like even some of the references I didn't pick up until I was thinking back about it. I didn't even realize that the symbol that the Chinese workers were putting on the heroin was the Danny Rand Iron Fist symbol. And it's interesting because she said, because Leland Owsley was like, "You're going back to China?" And she said, "No, farther away, way farther away than that." And I'm like, Kunlun? Are we talking about immortal cities here? Are we like bringing like some sly Iron Fist stuff?
And I mean, there's even some speculation going around that that woman, Gao, is, or I think at least I think that's her name.
Yeah, Gao.
Yeah. There's some speculation going around that potentially her identity there is fake, and she's actually going to turn out to be that woman that Danny Rand learns from in the comics. I forget what her name is.
Oh, yeah, I know who you're talking about. I don't remember her name.
It's like Witch something. I don't remember. I haven't read a lot of Iron Fist. He's not really my guy.
Mostly the Brubaker Fraction stuff that kind of most people looked at. I have to talk about the supporting cast because D'Onofrio is amazing. Charlie Cox is Daredevil is straight off the page Matt Murdock. I mean, I don't think we could have gotten a better Matt Murdock than Charlie Cox. But Wesley. He was one of my favorite characters, and I was so sad when he died because that relationship between him and Kingpin was heartwarming. They felt like real friends.
Yeah, which, I mean, is creepy on a lot of levels, but he was a very, very unique kind of henchman in that he actually had a bit of a personality without having to have a personality. If that makes sense?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And he's there and he does everything, and it's clear, especially when we lead up to his death, that he's smart enough to handle things on his own. So it makes you question, like, why is he loyal to Fisk in the first place? Kind of what's their backstory? We never really get to see that too much, but it creates this cool kind of mystery there, and like there's more there without us actually having to see it.
Yeah, it certainly plays on that generic mobster movie trope of our Don, our mob boss, has some sort of right-man hand like this that always gets everything done. And he's that in the fullest, but we see him do a lot of interesting things, like when Fisk doesn't need his help, he calls Vanessa for them. Like that was an interesting moment, and he's played really well. We see so much of him before we get to Fisk himself that he's responsible for a lot of the mystery and a lot of the cool payoffs that we get for the Kingpin, which makes his character immediately interesting. Because he's kind of a tool at the end of the day, but he's an effective tool.
Yeah. Yeah, that was it was very interesting, especially with the translator. Well, him being his translator, all of that stuff. It's weird because it's funny. Gal was saying that Kingpin was playing a fool. But I almost took it that Wesley was he was always trying to protect Kingpin. He was always rephrasing what people said and always trying to make it seem, just not what they actually said, tried to make it seem better or anything. And Nobu's reactions to his translations were hilarious. But it's such an interesting thing. We started off and we had the Russians, the Japanese, the Chinese, and we had the Kingpin. And how they systematically destroyed each other until there was only the Kingpin left was really interesting. Because at my first thought, I just assumed we were going to have Kingpin start out and he was kind of going to be already at the top. And he was, but we got more insight into his character and into how Hell's Kitchen works through his interactions with everybody else, his respect for Gao, his fear of Nobu and the Hand. We got more insight into the rest of this world through that kind of criminal organization.
Yeah, and interestingly, when we get like Kingpin becoming the Kingpin, like when Vanessa makes him come out into the light, and in I think the episode is Shadows in the Glass that we were talking about earlier. I think that's where it happens. When he comes out in the light, and he really becomes the Kingpin in his speech and in his mannerisms, and even in like his wardrobe, he becomes more comic book. It's great that a lot of the respect stuff and a lot of the sheltering that we get from Wesley and we get from Gao and sort of her insight into what his future is supposed to be really drives at what he ultimately becomes, like a self-fulfilling prophecy that he doesn't want to be his dad, but he kind of becomes his dad by going against it in the first place. But even so, he takes over the debt that his father owed in the opening of the series, so there's a little bit of overcompensation that leads to where he ends up.
Yeah, and that's another thing. I loved a lot of the scenes with him and Gal because they become very telling of who Kingpin actually is. And there was, I mean, he walked out and poured the tea, and he's like, I got this from like a lot of his dress and his mannerisms, especially for Asian culture in particular. He feels very. He wants to be connected to that. He wants to feel a part of it, but he never actually is.
He's almost like quasi-Confucian in the sense that, like, especially when we see him go throughout his day, everything is so precise and a certain way, and everything is lined up, and he's so meticulous. And I guess I just sort of see that connection there with the Chinese culture.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I love. Steve, what were you got?
Oh, sorry. I was just gonna say. And what's interesting is that you pair the semi-confusion mentality of Kingpin with Daredevil's whole journey being learning what to do in the particular situations like Stick taught you, and that's very Aristotelian. So that's interesting that we're not relying on a set of held principles like Confucius would or held advices as much as we're playing things by the numbers and just rolling with the punches, which is exactly what Daredevil is in the comics.
Yeah. And I felt like this, out of most superhero stories that I've seen or read, made the juxtaposition between the hero and the villain seem real and not the, you're more like me than you think you are speech felt real, especially when you get the backstory and how Kingpin basically became how he is because of his father, and how he wanted Wilson to be a violent man, basically, and how Matt's father wanted the opposite for him.
Yeah, I was really apprehensive when I saw that trailer for Daredevil and it had that line. I was like, can we not do this thing again, please? It's just become so cliche, but they handled it in a way that wasn't cliche at all. I totally agree. It felt 100% earned, and it made total sense within the context of the story that they were telling. Because there are genuine parallels between the two of them. They're both guys who, and I feel like this is what a lot of this whole story was about, is they're people who are willing to use violence for what they think is ultimately good ends, and that's, sort of where is the line here? Does Fisk cross it? Does Matt cross it at a certain point? And that just kind of feeds all the way through this, and so it totally makes sense that they would have that there, and that Kingpin would pick up on that and bring it up to him.
Yeah, and it's great that one of the first actions that Kingpin does is kill a man, and Matt's whole journey for multiple episodes is should he or should he not kill the Kingpin. All of that's handled really well. When we get that ultimate moment at the end where he captures the Kingpin and he tells the officer, I told you before that I'm not the bad guy, it plays so much better than it did in the Daredevil movie. Even in the director's cut, where that line felt like it came out of nowhere, here it really means something because Kingpin embraces his role as the bad guy, Matt embraces his role as the hero, but both of them are starting out from a place of they're men with conviction that want to make a difference somehow, and they're just doing it the best way they know how.
Which is maybe one of my complaints about this as a whole, is we don't really get a sense of what Fisk's plan actually is. How to fix Hell's Kitchen? He just sort of keeps telling us, oh, I'm going to make it a better place, and there aren't going to be human traffickers here and stuff like that. It's like, okay, but like, what are the specifics of your plan? Are you demolishing neighborhoods? Are you building condos? Like,
it's interesting. They kept on showing us his building plans, and all these, a lot of construction, Union Allied, all this stuff was fixated kind of around construction. And he blew up all those buildings, and it was like, so is his idea that, I mean, because he throws out the tenants, you know, is it that poor people, is it that misfortunate people, are they the problem, or
Yeah.
yeah, there didn't really seem to be a very what are you actually doing, you know, but not like the plans, but the way they talked about the city. Hell's Kitchen felt like a place, a real place, and the way they talked about the city, it just a lot of people in comics and in movies, they talk about Gotham, how Gotham feels like a real place, and how Gotham does things, and how Gotham has a personality. In this show, Hell's Kitchen feels like a person. It feels like it's this fluid personality that is kind of doing things and pushing things around, and so I really love that. Kind of bridging kind of away from that, the relationship between Vanessa and Wilson, just handled really well. And yet I have some problems with it because I don't Vanessa, how she impacts him. But I feel like I need to know. I feel like we didn't really get enough information about who Vanessa is as a person and why she would be okay with what he does, why she kind of supports and follows him.
That's a fair point. Because we don't really get that, what her reasoning is. Because initially she is kind of scared of him. The closest thing I could really compare it to is Ray Liotta's wife, Karen was her name in Goodfellas.
Mm-hmm.
She's sort of the same way, and you kind of wonder, well, why would she get mixed up with this guy? And it must be just sort of the power and everything is attractive. But those two characters sort of felt similar to me because initially they were very much afraid and didn't want to get involved, and kind of, they were intrigued enough to stick around to the point where they're essentially accomplices.
Yeah, because I think she had a bit of a direction and a force, and she felt almost like the way Death feels when she's talking to Thanos, in the sense that she's his little devil on Wilson's shoulder, and she's just pushing him along, and she's more of like a ghost and an addiction than she is really a character. I thought all that was interesting.
A very like Lady Macbeth type situation nearing the end.
Yeah, exactly. And I thought that stuff worked, but you're right. I think maybe just one flashback or something, because she mentions how she's dealt with people like Fisk before, and I kind of wish we saw that at least once.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure season 2, it looks like she's probably gonna. I hope what they do in season 2 is that she kind of goes away and we get a kind of a different problem, and then comes back, with a new purpose and with a new. And maybe we get Wilson in jail and stuff like that. But I kind of want to move to more broader, the season in general. Were there any parts, I guess besides the hallway fight, but that really stuck out to you as this is kind of the perfect version of this scene? My thinking is when Matt is talking to the priest. I don't think I've ever really seen that connection between Matt and his religion, or really any kind of superhero character, at least with religion in that way.
That scene, to me, felt like another one of those things where it's so cliche if you have the character go talk to the religious person for spiritual support, and it tends to be so hackneyed and shallow, and it's like, no, this guy's actually pretty progressive in his religion, and he's thought about this stuff a lot and has stuff to say, and it didn't feel cliched at all to me. It's, for my money, one of the best character goes to talk to a priest scenes that I've seen in anything. So I really liked it.
Yeah.
And plus, Matt is really shaky. He's not there necessarily because he's devoutly religious, as much as it's just sort of an aspect of his personality that was left over from his mom and dad. And so he's just religious by default, like a lot of people are. And so he goes to the priest for conversational advice because he doesn't really have another source of right or wrong. And then the priest tells him about the story about the devil, and that's fantastic, because it's not only it's not just some Bible-pushing type of character. He's legitimately a person. He talks about how he's a skeptic a little bit and how he's read and he's how explored some of these things. And so when you get that conversation and you get that payoff later when he tells Matt that he doesn't know whether he's killing Kingpin because he has to or because he wants to, it feels a lot more close to the comics, a lot more to his character, because we're getting a guy that doesn't have a source of moral guidance after his dad's gone, and even when his dad's there, he wasn't really the perfect father, really. He just kind of does what he can, but even he recognizes that he can't treat Matt as well as he could. So he's constantly looking for some kind of like father figure, just like Kingpin's constantly trying to get away from his dad's shadow. And so the priest is the ultimate compromise there. And it works. It doesn't feel like it's got any sort of agenda behind it. It really just feels like moral and intellectual questioning.
I'm going to get really religious and philosophical with it, but I almost see this. Yeah, I almost see this weird thing going on where it's like, obviously fathers are their son's vision of God to some extent, and so Matt's is very Christian in the sense that his father, was killed, and he's kind of living with that because in Christianity, God takes the form of man in Christ and then gets executed. But then Kingpin is almost like a Nietzschean in the sense of he kills his father, death of God kind of a thing. And to see those two characters go up against one another, one has some sort of moral center and the other struggling to find his own in the absence of that. I almost see this kind of Nietzschean sort of thing going on there.
And that scene where Fisk decides, where he makes the conscious decision, I am the ill intent. If there's any scene that I want to show, hey, if you want to use some sort of, if you want to use a biblical text, if anything, this is how you do it. It didn't feel off-putting. It felt perfect for that scene, and that kind of almost reveal at the end was because for some reason in my head I assumed he would see himself as the wounded traveler. Mm-hmm. For some reason I just assumed, because he was like, oh, he thought he was a good Samaritan, but he realized that everyone's being horrible to him, and then he's like, no, I'm the one doing the bad things, and I was like.
The cool thing about that story, too, is it's a really generic thing to do, but the way he tells the story and the arc he's had up to that episode, he could very well have been any one of those entities in that story at any point in the story, at any point of the series. So there was a point where he's the ill intent, and he is the good Samaritan, and he is the wounded traveler. He's got all of that going for him. So there's a legitimate mystery to what he's going to say at the end, and when he just embraces his role, it is kind of a Nietzschean thing, because Nietzsche's big thing is that he provided a reason for why everyone around him is sick, and everyone ignored him. And so now he has to completely break from tradition and break it down for people. That's exactly what Kingpin is doing by the end of the season.
It's funny, too, because I just remember now, because Nietzsche's, the subtitle to, Twilight of the Idols, is How to Philosophize with the Hammer, and Kingpin literally kills his father with the hammer. So...
See, this is why I have you guys on the show. We can look at Nietzsche, all this stuff that people, not you guys, probably don't understand.
And I mean, if we're gonna talk book subtitles, the subtitle to Daybreak is a book for free spirits, and that's all Kingpin's trying to be by the end of the day, is a free spirit from what his dad and what everyone else has made out of him.
True.
I think this is all on purpose.
Maybe.
Probably. Yeah, it's almost like people who write things have like ideas and themes that they try and put on them.
It's like they're trying to make a point or a statement.
Yeah, go figure.
Yeah. I tell you, I got to do Crisis in a few hours. I have no idea how I'm going to talk about Agents of Nobody Cares and other shows of that vein like Arrow and Flash now that I've seen Daredevil.
Yeah. Can we talk a little bit about, I guess, how this, because you mentioned Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., how this connects to the wider cinematic universe from Marvel? Because I was thinking, I had this idea way back when Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. was announced, and that was, why are they doing this and not a damage control show? Because New York was wrecked, and that was sort of their way to do Daredevil and do Hell's Kitchen specifically, because there was that Joe Carnahan Daredevil movie that was going to get made before the rights went back to Marvel. And it looked really, really cool because they were setting it in the 70s when Hell's Kitchen was actually a terrible place. And now
Because now Hell's Kitchen is more like a place that's going to charge you $12 for like some whiskey or something.
It's totally gentrified, and it's a rich neighborhood now. And so I was kind of wondering, well, how are they going to pull that off in modern New York? And it's like, no, a giant space techno whale fell on it and destroyed it, and that's why it's a crap neighborhood again. So, and the fact that they just call it The Incident and don't, say, oh, it was this horrible alien invasion from the skies. I just thought that was so funny. And it's able to then, I guess, connect it to this big world of gods with hammers and guys in robot suits and stuff, and super soldiers from Days Gone Old, and connect that to sort of regular everyday life, because Daredevil is a street-level superhero. And
it's great because and then when things like the Black Sky and stuff like that do show up, it doesn't feel out of place because we already know what the world around Hell's Kitchen is like, so it doesn't feel weird when stuff like that does start to seep in and seep through.
Mm-hmm.
An interesting thing, there are Easter eggs littered throughout the show. The Absorbing Man from Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. was the guy that Matt Murdock's dad fought.
Yeah.
It's interesting because this show does such a good job of carving out its own place, and yet not being so in it of itself that it feels weird being a part of everything else.
Although, in a certain respect, it kind of straddles that line a little bit, because if you ever get, like, Chris Evans' Captain America or Tony Stark show up in that universe, Daredevil's completely outclassed. He's not part of that kind of group of heroes, so it still maintains the identity of Daredevil's a street-level character. How does he compare to, like, super soldiers and gods and stuff? But at the same time, it's just another pocket in the universe. It's exactly like the comics. Like, when Daredevil teams up with Spider-Man, it's one thing, but when Captain America shows up and starts chucking his shield at him, it's a different story.
Yeah, because there is that one scene where basically that happens in Born Again, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Born Again's got Iron Man and Cap that show up at one point because Nuke's there, and it's a totally different story for a couple of pages.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that was. I always remember reading Born Again for the first time, and that particular part really standing out to me as feeling totally out of place.
Yeah. And it works. It feels like this show could ultimately do kind of a Born Again thing in a couple of seasons.
I would love that.
Yeah.
I want to see that fight. Good God. That'd be incredible.
I would love to see. It's interesting because Matt Murdock's Daredevil would kind of align with this Captain America. I feel like they would. Their ideals are very similar. I don't think Cap would kind of condone maybe some of his brutality, but their base morals are very similar, especially with Winter Soldier Captain America. Because it definitely feels like Matt Murdock, he could be in that situation. If he was in that situation, they would react basically the same way. And so,
sorry, go ahead.
Well, I was gonna move towards kind of the last episode and the show going forward.
Yeah.
Okay. I brought up how the last episode felt like the third act of a superhero movie, and we got the costume. Oh, did you guys know I got spoiled because it was impossible for me to avoid it. I was watching something and somebody literally like threw it on the screen, and I was like, crap! It didn't even say Daredevil costume or anything in the video. But did you guys get spoiled on it before you saw the episode?
Almost. I scrolled past it, and I didn't look. That was as close as I got. But no, I definitely wanted to wait to see it in action. Because that's the thing too with a lot of costumes is, you might like them, you might hate them when you just see a picture, especially when you just see a set picture and it doesn't even look like how it's supposed to look in the thing, and people judge it based on that. You kind of got to wait to see it in action, and that's really how I wanted to see it for the first time.
Yeah, agreed. I didn't get it spoiled for me. Every time I'd even notice, like, glance something that looks like a Daredevil poster, I would just rush past it so I wouldn't see the costume. I was really excited to see what it looked like on screen, and it reminds me a lot of the Ben Affleck costume in that costume looks terrible on figures. It looks terrible in the comic book. It looks terrible in photos, but in action, it's great.
It looked really good. I'm pretty sure the three of us we're the weirdest guys in comics. We don't hate that. Like I like the director's cut. I will argue up and down that the director's cut is a good movie. It's maybe not the best movie in the world, but it's not for all
It
intents.
has its problems, but it's not atrocious.
Exactly. People put that on the list of top 10 worst, and I'm like, no, there are worse. There are definitely worse movies than the 2003 Daredevil movie. But when I saw when I saw the costume in episode 13, I just giggled and laughed like a giddy schoolboy because I absolutely love it. It's interesting because it doesn't look like something I would like at first, especially with the black and the red. And I kind of like and dislike their reasoning. Oh well, I didn't get he basically didn't get to finish the costume,
Yeah.
Yeah.
and I was like, okay, that's whatever. Is he gonna take it back to him and get it finished, or
Yeah, I guess that leaves it open for them to evolve the costume as time goes on.
yeah.
Yeah.
An interesting thing is that I didn't realize until I saw the schematic of the blade on the working table that character is the Gladiator character from the Daredevil comics.
Okay.
Yeah, and he's really, especially with his say handicap. We don't exactly know, but we just know that he's a little slow, and that's kind of the character in the comics is also kind of got a learning disability. But it's interesting because that character, that is the relationship between Matt Murdock and the Gladiator. Basically, Matt kind of helps him, but they help each other. But sometimes Gladiator just kind of goes off the rails and flips out, and it was really cool when I put it together, and I was like, oh my god, that makes sense.
And it's so cool that they already have Betsy with the Gladiator that we don't have to see the origin of that relationship. She's already there, and she's already part of that life, and we already have an established relationship between Matt, the Gladiator, and Betsy and the Kingpin. It's off the page without having to do any extra work for that.
Yeah, it's really this show does a lot of things well. And speaking of comics and Leland, he was perfect, but I really didn't see him coming. I just assumed his play of having the Holland, I think, the detective, whatever, scooted away, whatever, would save his life, but I didn't see him getting thrown down an elevator.
Yeah, I was a little bit, I don't want to say like disappointed that because I didn't expect them to go full on, the owl from the comics and him, have talons and stuff like that. But he could have had funky sideburns or something.
Well, I expected him to at least I expected him just to stick around and maybe have schemes and kind of be.
Yeah.
And so I was like, it's interesting. They took a lot of departures. A lot, and not so many, but a lot of departures from the comics. And yet you don't hear everyone bitching and complaining. You know why? Because it's a good show.
Yes.
And it's so hypocritical because I see people that I have seen complain about things that I've seen go, well, they changed that and that's not good, and then they're talking about how this show's so amazing and so well done. It's like, as long as you get the spirit and you get the nuts and bolts and you get how this thing works, you should be able to change and kind of mix things up to fit the story that you want to tell, as long as the ingredients and as long as the spirit of what you're adapting stays true.
For sure.
Yeah.
That's always my kind of thing is, I like certain changes. I dislike other certain changes, but it's a case-by-case sort of a thing. It's not, oh, they changed it, so it's bad. That's I think, one of the worst attitudes in fandom. Changing things doesn't inherently make them bad. You have to make changes, especially when we change mediums. Granted, this is probably the closest medium to comics, given it is, sort of serialized. With each episode sort of representing a different issue, so to speak. But you have to change things. It's inevitable. Changing them isn't necessarily bad. So,
especially since not every actor can look exactly like the page.
And that might not even be the version of them that you want to do. So it definitely needs to be taken on a case-by-case thing. And it is always sad to see those people who make those complaints a lot, and I'm referring to specifically those same people, then be totally fine with something and not get that they are being hypocritical.
Yeah, and I mean, especially when we're just talking Daredevil, there's a lot of things you can do. There's a lot of problems in the comic, just like there's a lot of good stuff. So when you pull things like the Owl or the Kingpin, you have to make certain changes just because the story you want to tell warrants them. It's a very different thing than, say, making a change in like the Catwoman or Elektra movie just because it's cool or it sells tickets. Like this is there because the story needs some departures and because the story needs to be distilled, like you said, Alex, earlier, into its bare bones. And it gets the nuts and bolts right. And I think the only bolt that it even just slightly misses is the name. How he becomes Daredevil, I really resisted the fact that the media just names him Daredevil.
It was a weird scene because you saw him and his cop friend kind of confront each other, and I expected him to say, be like, "Oh, Daredevil," just spit out some line, but then he doesn't, and then it just becomes Daredevil, and I'm like, so did he make up, or was it just a me? What did he like say? Oh, this Daredevil guy. It was really confusing.
Because they set that up earlier, where they mention how Matt's aunts would say like the Murdoch boys has got the devil in them, and they never pay that off. They never use that to get the name.
Hell's Kitchen, it was there for it to be kind of a growth, and it just kind of felt like the ending was really weird.
Yeah.
With that, there was this longing look at Karen, and it was really off-putting because I wasn't sure what they were trying to. It was kind of uplifting, but that ending shot maybe just went on for a little too long because it felt like we were supposed to maybe be thinking there was something else going on for a second.
Yeah, it was like they got to the end and they were like, crap, we have to tie all this stuff up in the last episode. We should probably get on that. And then, yeah, because there was that shot with Matt and Karen at the end, and it's like, are they trying to hint at that relationship in the future? Like, they didn't build towards it, so it just seems sort of out of place.
It's weird, because it was at the same time that he was asking kind of about her emotional state. And so she, said about how we can't really forget all this stuff because these people died. And I think there's supposed to be a mystery about her past. Obviously, I mean, she said this isn't the first time I've shot somebody before. She has a dark past, so I didn't know if we were supposed to suspect something because he was just staring her kind of almost. The shot was very reminiscent of the first time he looked at her, and he was sensing her heartbeat. And so I wasn't sure if they were trying to make that connection or if it was just it's supposed to be a long shot.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because I want to give it the benefit of the doubt and say that it's just Matt's got his suspicions at the end of it, but they shoot it so optimistically, it's almost like, hey, these two guys are about to get together, and it's a little strange. It's the one place in the whole series, I think, that the director was not able to convey what they were meant to, and in a show that's this tightly written and this tightly directed, that's kind of odd. Just the entire palette for that last scene is completely off.
Yeah, it was very interesting. Especially, it's weird because in my head I was formulating this big like, oh, I understand why the last episode is this uplifting and all this stuff because it's supposed to be like a build and whatever, and it's supposed to feel like a superhero movie. Like that, I kind of got that. The last episode was supposed to feel like, the rest of the show has been this dark, gritty, and finally. This is, the moment. Like the angels rain down and the heavens open up and everything's all well in the world. And I don't know if that transition from episode 12 to episode 13 of we're coming out of the darkness kind of thing worked as well as I wanted it to.
It felt very abrupt.
Mm-hmm.
Like it did just kind of come out of left field. Like you said, it felt like the last act of a superhero movie. Which just made it feel really weird and kind of out of place with the previous 12 episodes.
Yeah, and I wanted the Kingpin Daredevil fight to be more violent.
Yes.
It should have been way more, and I don't know if they maybe are saving that for later, for maybe when Wilson gets out of jail, but it was, that's just me trying to explain, trying to give like benefit of the doubt, but it was really quick too.
Mm-hmm.
And I understand that when they first fought, it was very... Matt had just been through one of the most brutal fights in the series with Nobu. Just when that chain wrapped around his body and he got dragged. It was so brutal. And
Yeah.
so he was like at, like 20% fighting capability when he fought Kingpin at that time. But I still felt like that last fight was very rushed.
Yeah, it lacked catharsis. I mean, like, these guys have built a relationship, and they're so similar, and there's all these thematic parallels between them for the audience, and we get that fight, and we don't really get a payoff. Like, these guys aren't having some sort of fluid experience and beating the crap out of each other like everyone else did for the rest of the series.
And that final punch felt like it was supposed to be a big cathartic moment. And it was like, well, but you guys didn't really get at each other. And maybe it was a time issue because, I mean, it was near the end of the episode, and this was, I want to say it was a 60-minute one, but it might have been 50, around the 50 sign.
I mean, I don't want to rewrite it, but I feel like all you had to do for that last episode is pay off the Owl, say that he's taken over the Kingpin's empire. Kingpin's backup plan is for him and Vanessa to go out and get contacts in China with Gao or whatever. So they try to rush back, but because the Owl doesn't want Kingpin to get away and take over his empire, he tips off the police on all of his plans because he keeps records or something. That's how he gets taken into custody. Matt's big fight is to try and send him to jail, and that's your last episode.
Yeah.
And then even the name thing, you could have made an excuse for why the media gives him the name Daredevil just because now him and his city are more intertwined in that way. But yeah, again, they just try to do way too many things. They try to have Kingpin break out and in and out of jail like 3 times in that episode. It's a little bit packed, and it's also a little bit misallocated in its time.
Yeah.
And it didn't really feel like it was a moral victory at the end of the day when he defeated the Kingpin. It was just sort of, yeah, okay, we're at this point, I guess they got to fight, right?
It was weird because I think there was supposed to be a moment where, Daredevil had that moment where it's like, I could kill him, but I'm not going to. But I didn't feel like we got that moment because at that point, Matt Murdock has a levy of things to be upset and angry about Kingpin at. But almost by that time, I'd kind of forgotten why Matt was angry because he wasn't really fighting angry. He was just kind of fighting. And maybe that was supposed to be a whatever, but nothing came across from the screen of what they were trying to do.
I mean, if anything, the way it was shot and the way the music played, it's almost like the fight was more about the costume than anything else.
Which is kind of why I felt like the third act of a superhero movie, because it felt like this, oh yeah, you little nerds, here we are, we got it now.
Yeah, I mean, like, there were so many shots of him playing around with his new Billy Club and stuff. I'm like, you're kind of killing the magic of what those fight scenes were with that.
Yeah.
So, we're running out of time, but season 2 of Daredevil. Well, hopefully, because this Daredevil, then Jessica Jones, and then I think Iron Fist and Luke Cage series.
Yeah.
Luke Cage, then Iron Fist.
Luke Cage, Iron Fist, and then a Defenders series.
Yes.
I really hope we don't have to wait until Defenders to get season 2 of Daredevil.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's going to be one of the problems, especially if one of these series maybe falls a little short, which really with this department and this creative team, well, I don't think it's the same creative team, but with this Marvel Studios, I can't really see these series failing just because the Netflix team seems to have a really good lockdown on who works on their stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But if, say, Iron Fist isn't that great, then the people looking forward to the Defenders is not really, and then it just pushes things back. I'm really hoping we get season 2 of Daredevil soon because this was really good.
In fairness, I mean, as far as the movies go, Marvel has had some that, I mean, they didn't have any that did terribly, but they had some that didn't do great. I don't think the Thor movies performed all that well.
The Thor movies have never really been their go-to.
Yeah.
Just like a Thor movie just kind of gets thrown in there because they feel like they have to have a Thor movie.
Mm-hmm.
Which is sad because I love the character and I love the world, but it almost feels like they never do it 100% justice, except for that first movie, which was good, but it wasn't as good as I wanted it to be.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I kind of feel the same way. But my point is just, Marvel seems to be like a steamroller and like the Juggernaut, who they don't have the rights to, and they just kind of keep going forward and forward with their plans, regardless of kind of what happens. So I have confidence the Netflix thing will kind of go the same way, although Again, like you mentioned, the Netflix people are sort of involved too, so I don't know how much of a say they have, but clearly Daredevil performed amazingly well critically, and a lot of people are watching it and talking about it, so
I mean,
I think we're on good footing for a second season.
Still trending, I'm pretty sure. It's been trending for like the past since it came out. Daredevil's been trending worldwide, and now Wilson Fisk and Matt Murdock, like it's just been there for the past 3 days or whatever.
Daredevil's been dominating social media. Everyone and their mother is talking about it.
And I hope that the Netflix model doesn't harm the marketing, because next week, the thing about Breaking Bad was that everyone had a week to talk about it and a week to digest everything. Mm-hmm. And I feel like hopefully everyone doesn't try to watch it because of spoilers, because I think so far people have been really good to not spoil what's going on in this show. I mean, I know we're doing a spoiler cast, but it's in the video title.
Yeah.
It's not like I'm tweeting, oh, hey, Leland Owsley just got killed. I haven't seen any of that, which I think is really good for the show, because people don't feel like they have to get through it.
Yeah, I've noticed that too, actually. And come to think of it, the only other Netflix originally produced thing that I've seen so far is just House of Cards, and I haven't seen it with that show either. So maybe that is just sort of a side effect of this approach, is people are less willing to spoil because they know, my aunt hasn't decided to watch it this weekend or whatever. Which is good. I like that. I like that we live in that world, because I don't want to be spoiled for stuff, for sure.
Definitely not.
Yeah, agreed. This is a show you really don't want spoiled for you, and going into it I was like, well, what is there to spoil? It's Kingpin and Matt Murdock fighting each other for 13 episodes, but no, it's got so much more to it and so much you can appreciate with characters that you don't want spoilers, and it seems like everyone's kind of got like a non-verbal agreement about that. The only thing that was even remotely spoilery is the costume, and that's more of just Marvel releasing it too early.
And that was also because there was someone had found the photo that's used for the Daredevil Netflix show that has the red costume and released that early, and so Marvel was like, the same thing happened with the Avengers trailer too. Marvel released it early because somebody did something.
Yeah.
I hate, because it's like, can't we just enjoy things?
Yeah.
Wait. Hopes for season 2. Obviously they're probably gonna do more of the hand stuff. I don't know if they're going to do that in season 2 though. If they're gonna try and move more to the mystical. It's interesting because the last episode kind of has everything tied up. There's obviously threats, but there's nothing looming on the horizon. It's just Kingpin's in jail. We know he's going to come back at some point. Vanessa's probably going to come back, but nothing feels like an immediate threat right now.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
It'd be cool to see them throw Elektra and Bullseye into the mix, and that could be season 2, and then maybe season 3 is Fisk coming back. Could be interesting.
Yeah, I think it'd be really cool if they did Elektra, but they also combined some of the Bendis stuff in there. Like, what if you were dealing with Elektra at the same time you were dealing with Matt potentially being outed? Because I feel like at this point, Kingpin's next big goal would be to figure out who Daredevil is, and they hinted on that quite a bit in this in this series. Which, by the way, the first time Matt and Kingpin were face to face with each other, that was really intense. That was astoundingly intense.
The undertones of that entire scene, of just the little things both of the actors were doing too, because it was on both sides. Matt was obviously acting, but Kingpin was acting very, very interesting. You could read into a lot of how they were acting and reacting to each other. Is Kingpin just acting that way because somebody's talking to Vanessa, who he's very overprotective of, or does he hear something in that voice? And, it was so well done.
And if season 2 pans out the way we're talking about it, then season 3 can be Born Again, and that would be great. Season 3 Born Again, season 4 Guardian Devil. You've got your 4-season Daredevil show, and it's perfection.
Yeah, it's interesting because Charlie Cox's Daredevil and this TV show's Daredevil feels just like Bendis' Daredevil.
Yeah.
He feels like kind of Bendis' writing and Bendis' story, and I would really love this. Charlie Cox feels like the type of Daredevil who would, like Bendis did, beat the crap out of Kingpin, say, I'm Matt Murdock, I'm the new Kingpin, nobody mess with my turf, and the other hero, and take over Hell's Kitchen basically. And I'm just so interested to see what stories they choose to adapt. Guardian Devil would be amazing, especially with Matt's relationship to his faith.
Yeah. And you mentioned Charlie Cox's performance. The guy also did Stardust. You could just as easily take this actor and do Mark Waid stuff, which I know, Alex, you kind of want a little bit more of. But like, this is the same actor that could probably pull off a scene where he's riding on the Silver Surfer surfboard because it's fun.
I would love to see the Ikari stuff.
Yeah.
That stuff would be really but we'd have to have Bullseye first, or we could have someone else really. That'd be interesting. Leland is crippled, and he decides he's gonna make this master plan to ruin Daredevil's life. But yeah, the show was everything that I ever wanted from the show and more. And it's given me this Daredevil itch. I gotta get more Daredevil. I have the first volume of the Mark Waid, and I have some Brubaker stuff, which is the Daredevil in prison stuff, which I would love to see adapted. Because that stuff is it's really interesting, especially to see how Daredevil plays with the prison system and dealing with his identity coming out. And I'd love to see a Punisher in prison. Because in that story arc, he runs into Frank Castle in prison, and Frank Castle would fit perfectly, and the relationship with him and Daredevil would be straight off the page, because Matt doesn't like killing. He's Frank Castle.
I've been wanting them to bring the Punisher into the Marvel Cinematic Universe for a really long time, and I think especially with the tone of these Netflix series, at least as far as Daredevil has said it, and I think from what we've heard, what we're going to get from the other ones, Punisher would fit right in.
Yeah.
I would love to see even if it was only a single season of a Punisher Netflix show. That would be right up my alley.
Yeah, that would be really good. And it seems like, especially with what we're hearing about the Jessica Jones show, that they're going to have Purple Man.
Yeah.
And probably going to be exploring some of that backstory, which would be crazy ground for them to go in. But this show had a guy impale himself.
Yeah.
So, which is probably, I think, one of the most gruesome things that the show did was, I just imagine it.
This show is not afraid of earning its rating as opposed to forcing it in there. Daredevil is a character. If you're gonna do him in the Bendis Miller way, you can't get away with PG-13. But they've certainly got a handle on how you're supposed to do that and how to make it classy. It's not gratuitous violence. It's there for a purpose, and it really works.
Yeah, and all the everything about this show is purposeful. Every little nod of Charlie Cox's head is for a reason. I especially love how they use his senses, and they do this thing where he'll focus in on a sound, and that's like the clicking of the watch. But it's interesting because they do that, and then sometimes the volume's just turned up to 11. Sometimes every little sound is just heightened. Like you'll just hear someone walking, and those footsteps are like, up to 20, just because that's how Matt Murdock sees the world. And he might not even be focusing on it, but that's just how we hear it because we're seeing the world through him.
Yeah.
Yeah, I liked that we didn't get just sort of a recreation of like the radar sense from the Daredevil film.
Yeah.
Although I guess there's the one scene, but they tied into other stuff with the World on Fire theme and everything. But I loved the way that they portrayed it, and it wasn't things radiating from his head or something like that. Because we've sort of seen that with everything now. We saw it in the Daredevil movie. That's how the whole detective mode thing works in the Arkham Asylum games. It's not really original anymore. So what they did made it feel very distinct, and it definitely worked visually.
And just like from a technology standpoint, we get kind of spoiled with 4K definition TVs and surround sound stuff, but you play this show in surround sound, and it's a totally different experience. The fact that the sounds click in your mind and in the back of your head and stuff, just like they do with Matt, and it's really cool how they utilize that.
I was using, when I was watching it at night, I had headphones on. And watching that show with headphones on, it's just crazy because all of the sounds are going all around you, and you're kind of just like, just like doing a little like twitching because you're like, what was that? What was that? So, final thoughts.
More of this, please.
Yeah.
Put it in a syringe so I can just inject it right in my vein. I need more of this. This was just phenomenal.
I talk on and on about how much I love Captain America: The Winter Soldier, but I love Daredevil more than I like any Captain America character or even The Winter Soldier, and this is just so perfect. This is maybe the best thing Marvel's ever done.
Yeah, this.
And I mean, I know we both like Iron Man 3 a lot. We like Winter Soldier a lot, but like this show, it's in a league of its own.
Yeah, it's kind of what I want from, because I love movies. I love the Avengers. I love Iron Man 3. I love Captain America: The Winter Soldier because they do what they do big comic stories, right? You know, you want an arc, do a movie. But if you just want serialized, like TV is how you do comics.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, episode 1 felt like the first issue to a comic. Each episode felt like an issue. It felt like a collected run, and it was just done so perfectly and so well. That even the things I don't care for, like not even don't care for, but just any of the things that we talked about throughout this, spoiler cast. It doesn't hamper my experience at all, and the experience of this show is that you need to go out and watch it.
Yeah.
Well, that is everything, I think, for the Daredevil spoiler cast. I had a lot of fun talking about this show with you guys today.
Likewise.
Yeah, likewise.
Yeah. Steve, where can everyone on the internet find you and all of your ramblings?
You can just go on my channel, which is just my name, Steve Baxi. You can watch me on Geekvolution almost any time because I'm there a lot.
I am so sorry about the discussion shows. You watch them, so we don't have to.
I can't
Flash,
live back to Arrow after this, man. I can't live after watch Arrow still.
Arrow, just poor man's Batman and even poorer man's Daredevil now.
Yeah, but in a couple hours here, we're going to do the Primetime Cryfest Live today. Right before that, Dan and I are about to record a review for Heir to the Jedi, so look for that. Cap and I did a commentary, or Cap, I, and Dan did a commentary for the Daredevil Director's Cut, so that's coming out soon. And we did a commentary for Winter Soldier, and that's coming out soon.
Nice.
Aside from all of that, I'm also on Geeky Gentleman every week, so look forward to that.
You're just all over the internet.
Apparently, yeah.
Alex, where can everybody find you on the internet?
My YouTube channel is youtube.com/superheroenthusiast. The Twitter for that is @heroenthusiast. And if you just want to follow me ramble about communist stuff mostly, you can follow me at @expedientmeans on Twitter.
And you can find me every day on Twitter, because I'm usually tweeting something every day, @JohnJohnsick. I'm probably usually talking to these two guys about whatever's going on in comics. You can find me here, youtube.com/hi, my name is Mr. J. I might not be posting videos all the time, but when I do, I try to make it interesting, and I try to hopefully get some cool guests. Guys, thank you a lot for coming on.
Yeah,
Thanks for having me.
us.
All right, and we will see you guys later.